Good day, grade 10s. How's it going? Hope you guys are coping and you guys are managing to get through the work. So, as aforementioned, we're going to be doing plastids and the mitochondria. Plastids, you know exactly what plastids are. You have heard the name multiple times, but it's never like there's never been a name put to the entire structure itself. So, we're going to be doing plastids and mitochondria today. Just like a brief introduction of these two, a plastid is actually, well, one of the type of plastids is a chloroplast. So please remember that a chloroplast is something that has a green pigment inside of it called chlorophyll. So it's a whole bunch of organelles that contain pigments, and one does not contain pigments, but it's able to convert back and actually change into pigments as it feels fit. Okay, then we got the mitochondria, and we know that it's involved in cellular respiration, and that cellular respiration itself is able to produce the energy molecules ATP, and by producing that ATP, you are able to live. So please also just note that this section is very simple, but it can get very complex as well. So if any of you want to go and read up a little bit more, I recommend you go and study something called endosymbiosis. And that's the idea that mitochondria and chloroplasts actually did not necessarily come from the cell itself. Because, I mean, if something with green pigments arrived in all living things, human beings would be green as well. Dogs would be green, cats would be green. So all animals don't have these plastids, which is very strange. But yet both animals and plants have mitochondria. All right, so things start to get not pear-shaped, if you will, but they become a bit weird and wonderful as we go along. All right, so let's begin with plastids. So plastids are only found in plant cells. That is so important. I recommend you highlight that. I often like asking the differences between them, and you'll be expected to do a comparison table at the end of this with content that I've actually left for you. So it's the site of manufacture of storage and traditional chemical compounds used by the cell, and there are three different types of plastids: the chloroplasts, chromoplasts, and leucoplasts. So let's just quickly go over the prefixes and suffixes over there. Chloro we know means green, chromo means color, and leuco, which comes from this word white. So if you remember the word leukocyte, that means white blood cell. So leuco meaning white, and plasts meaning plastids. Okay, so chloroplast, a green plastid; chromoplast, colorful plastids; leucoplast, white plastids. All right. And then just above over there, it also mentioned traditional chemical compounds. Traditional chemical compounds in terms of organic compounds, so stuff like carbohydrates and fats majority of the time. You're not going to manufacture proteins in there because hopefully you remember from last year, ribosomes do that. And we'll do that in a later part of this course. So let's have a look at chloroplasts specifically. They're found in cells of plant tissue involved in photosynthesis. So if there is a part of the plant that is not involved in photosynthesis, you will not find chloroplasts. Now I want you to think so long about what parts of the plant are not involved in photosynthesis. And how could you tell that by just looking at a plant? So think about it. Chloroplasts are green, right? That means that they have to have the green pigment called chlorophyll. So what would cause a plant to actually produce the chlorophyll? And that is the fact that it is exposed to light, direct light. So now, what part of the plant is not exposed to direct light? That would be the roots and parts of the stem. So now obviously the stem is a bit wishy-washy because you can imagine your parsley that's growing out there, or your rose bushes to a large extent. Some of them, the stems are green, which means that they're going through the process of photosynthesis. But as soon as there is bark that is produced on the outside of that, it stops that direct light from actually hitting the stem, and then the stem loses its green colors. And you can actually walk outside and go pull off a piece of bark, and you'll notice that underneath is completely white, much like this atrocious color behind me over here. So chlorophyll is only in places where photosynthesis can take place. So that's mainly leaves, to a large extent, some parts of the fruits of the plant. When I say fruit, please don't get confused either. Don't think I'm just talking about like apples and pears, and while they're developing, well, they're green, so they must go through photosynthesis. And to a large extent they do, but there's other ones that don't as well. Think of peas. Think of any structure that holds seeds in it. That is a fruit. So any structure that has like seeds inside of it and is green is also able to go through photosynthesis. So if you have anything that is green on a plant, it's able to go through photosynthesis. Now, I want you to start thinking, but then, so where do all the other colors come from? Like roses come in pink, and they come in white, and they come in red, and they come in oranges, and where do all these colors come from? And we'll get to that a little bit later. But please just note that it says chlorophyll, the green pigment, is found inside of thylakoids. We'll get to what a thylakoid is a little bit later. So chlorophyll traps energy or radiant energy, so that's UV rays or sun rays, allowing for photosynthesis to continue. So we'll go over the equation for photosynthesis a little bit later, so don't worry or stress too much about that. But you will need to know that equation as we go along. So this is a basic diagram of a chloroplast. So what you're noticing is that we're going to start on the left-hand side. So there's an outer membrane and an inner membrane. So the outer membrane is the membrane that is facing the cytoplasm. So remember that this whole entire thing is inside of the cell, and that outer membrane is facing the cytoplasm. So chemical messages are being able to be sent from the cytoplasm to that outer membrane. Then we have a membrane inside of that, okay? And what scientists have found, and please don't think this works for the nucleus as well, this is known as a double membraned plastid. All of them are double membrane. All the plastids are double membrane. But in the greater scheme of things, the membrane that is on the outside is the same as the plasma membrane or cell membrane of the cell. What they went and realized was the inner membrane, however, is not made out of the same phospholipids as the outer membrane, which means that this inner membrane came from somewhere else. Now, if you go and briefly Google endosymbiosis, they'll be able to explain the idea of where they came from. It's super scandalous, so go have a read up on it. Then we've got the cytoplasm equivalent of the chloroplast, and that is called the stroma. So that is obviously made majority out of water. It is a jelly-like substance, and where a lot of the chemical reactions take place. When we do photosynthesis later on this year, I'm going to bring that up to you again and make you actually realize what the importance of a stroma really is. And photosynthesis is actually broken up into two parts, light dependent and light independent, and that is ultimately going to point out where or which one is being done where. Then we have the Grd10. So you guys are able to see those beautiful little green like discs, those ovals. They're actually discs, and I've got a 3D picture which I'll post up in the group a little bit later so you can see what these things truly look like. And those are actual like little round beautiful little discs, and those discs actually contain the chlorophyll themselves. So that is where your light dependent, because you need radiant energy or sunlight for the process of photosynthesis to actually occur. So inside of that, so that specific thylakoid, if you stack them on top of each other, you create what is called a Grd10. Now you'll notice that just to the left hand side there is another Grd10, and next to that is another Grd10, and below that is another Grd10. So multiple Grd10 is called, well, singular is Grd10, plural is Grd10. So one Grd10, many Grd10. So you can see the multiple Grd10 made out of thylakoids. Now, there's another really crazy word over there, and that is called the intergranular thylakoid. So these stacks of thylakoids need to be able to communicate with each other. And the way that they directly communicate with each other is through these intergranular thylakoids. So let's say one Grd10 has lots of, let's say, carbon dioxide or water, and it needs to shift across. The intergranular thylakoid will actually allow for that to occur. So it's actually able to send bits and pieces through. Let's just carry on quickly. So here is a more 3D version over there. So you can see that there are beautiful little discs, and please don't get confused. Like, I know this is a lot more in terms of labels, and we'll draw one later and I'll tell you what to add into that. So first things first, let's start on the left hand side. So you see the word stroma. So again, the stroma is the cytoplasm of the chloroplast, and that's where light independent photosynthesis is able to take place. Then we have chloroplast DNA. What on earth is chloroplast DNA doing in there? Like, what is DNA doing inside of a chloroplast at all? So what I want you to now realize was, remember earlier on I said that there was an inner membrane and an outer membrane, and they're both smooth, by the way. And this inner membrane does not look the same as the outer membrane. So if something has its own DNA, could that potentially mean that this entire little chloroplast is actually its own type of cell? Okay, this is why I said it's getting a bit scandalous. So in other words, you have something that is living inside of you, well, not you as a human, but as a plant, that is actually able to do its own thing. Then they've got a layer just next to that of stacked thylakoids, which are called a granum. We have the external membrane, internal membrane, and intermembrane space. I don't need you to know the intermembrane space, but I do expect you to know outer membrane and inner membrane. Then we got the plastoglobule. I'm not too phased about that, but ultimately what that is a starch grain. So remember that the chloroplast is going to producing lots and lots of glucose. But I also spoke to you at the beginning of the year when we did glucose and we did osmosis. I said to you that an increase in glucose can actually shift the amount of water that is moved along. So what the body does, or what the chloroplast does specifically, is it converts all that glucose into a starch grain, and that is insoluble in water, which means it will not affect the movement of water whatsoever. Inside over there, you can see they've got a little ribosome, which means that we can make proteins in over here. And then if you go to the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the word thylakoid. You need to know how to spell this word, please. In the olden days, not olden days, but I'm talking a couple of years ago, we actually just used to call it the lamella. So a lamella is just something that forms a sort of oval shape and is disc in structure. But I would be far happier if you remember the word thylakoid. Then the thylakoids are thylakoid membranes, and they have an open area inside of them. Open, which means that it has lumen. Now, hopefully you remember from your circulatory system last year when we drew an artery or vein, like it had muscle around the outside and some skin, and then there was a hole in the middle, and that hole was actually called the lumen. Then over here they've called it the lamella over there, but we know now that this is the intergranal thylakoid. All right, so intergranal thylakoid. So I just want to point that out to you. Alrighty, what is the function of a chloroplast? It's involved in the process of photosynthesis. Now, so what are the equations for photosynthesis? Well, surprise, surprise, I've put it underneath over there. So, I have given you both the chemical and the word equations. I expect you to know both of them off by heart. So, the photosynthesis is CO2 plus H2O with the use of sunlight or UV rays and the help of chlorophyll to produce C6H12O6 and O2. So that is carbon dioxide plus water with the use of UV rays and chlorophyll produces glucose and oxygen. Now, I just want to double check what you were taught in grade 8 and 9. Please remember that that arrow itself means to produce or synthesis. So we are adding carbon dioxide and water to produce glucose and oxygen. It actually becomes a bit of a sentence, which helps quite a bit. But now the UV rays or sunlight and chlorophyll, those are just the necessary conditions that are needed for this process to occur. So realize that sunlight and chlorophyll are not necessarily used up in this equation, but it is what is necessary for the process to occur. Because otherwise, think about it. If you breathe on some water, it's not like random glucose is going to form and random oxygen is going to be popped off of that. So you need the chlorophyll as well as the sunlight to be able to do this entire process. I want you now to stop the video and I want you to draw this. I just want to add a couple of things to this, please. Please will you also include a little squiggly line somewhere along there which indicates that this is and label it chloroplast mitochondria, chloroplast DNA. And I also want you to add a little circle in somewhere and I want you to label that starch grain. So draw this. This is extremely important. I will expect you to be able to draw this at in a cycle test and or an exam. This is maybe just a prettier version, so you're more than welcome to draw this one as opposed to the previous one, but it's like pretty much exactly the same. Maybe just leave out certain things like a drop of lipid, leave out intermembrane space, but otherwise everything inside of there is 100%. If you're going to draw these, please remember to just add in a side note that the singular is granum, but the plural is grana. And then make a note at the starch granule where it says glucose or free glucose is bound together in a string of glucose molecules to create starch granule, which stops the movement of water. The lamella over there, I want you to change the name to intergranal lamella or intergranal thylakoid. Make note that the stroma is the cytoplasm of the chloroplast, and that's about it. All right. We have the chromoplasts as well, which contain a variety of pigments, which gives yellow, orange, and red color to flowers and fruits. So now all of a sudden you're finding, okay, hey, so besides chloroplasts, we now have these chromoplasts, and they contain all these other weird and wonderful colors. Now, please remember that a cell can actually, well, a chromoplast can produce a whole range of these different colors, causing different variations of yellow, of orange, of red. And that is extremely important for you to recognize. You're also going to use these to create your pinks and your purples. And I want you to go and Google the fact that, or go and try and figure out why there are no blue flowers. And that is because the chromoplast actually just can't produce it. And there's a whole bunch of videos on YouTube explaining that blue is actually not a natural color, which is very interesting. So even blue animals or blue plants, it's not that they're producing a blue pigment, it's because of how light is refracting through something or it's bending through something. It's not just bouncing off. And I want you to also try and remember from grade 9 how color is actually formed. So color is actually the absence of that, or like is the light bouncing off of that ray and the absence of everything else. Okay. Now, these colors aid in pollination and seed dispersion by animals. So you think about it, if you walked up to a banana and it was completely green, you know that you should not eat it because it's not ripe yet, okay? So what this indicates to a pollinator or an animal is that, hey, I can actually navigate myself towards these things and it will be ripe. So that is more for fruit. But when we're talking about flowers, certain pollinators only respond to certain colors. So for instance, if something was a dark color, so your greens, your blues, your purples, it would not necessarily be pollinated by bees because bees only are attracted to warm colors like yellows, oranges, and reds. So different pollinators respond in different ways. And then the idea of pollination also falls to pieces as well when we start talking about how certain pollinators actually function at night. So then are they relying on color? No, but they're relying on scent, which we'll do a little bit later. Then the third point over there, chloroplasts are able to change into chromoplasts. So these plastids are interchangeable. So a chloroplast can turn into a leucoplast, and that can turn into a chromoplast, and vice versa. They can move all the way around. And this is, for instance, when fruit ripens. So once the fruit itself has developed enough, it's gone through photosynthesis more than enough, and it recognizes that it is now, well, has enough glucose or starch to be able to be eaten, it will then change its green chloroplast, get rid of all the chlorophyll, and start producing stuff like xanthophyll and carotenoids. So xanthophylls are your oranges and your reds, and carotenoids are also like your oranges. So please also note that these things can change between each other, and that is what's going to help. I will probably put in your June exam something about fruit ripening and how that is caused by chloroplasts turning into chromoplasts. So make a note on that. Then we have our bad boy leucoplasts. They're colorless plastids which store food in the form of starch. Okay. Please note again, it is for like storing food. So what is that? Food initially, glucose, and remember that starch is a long string of glucomolecules as well. So the starch is created so that it can be stored. Found in organs such as underground storage stems, so tubers. And what is a tuber? It's a potato. All right. So technically, a potato, you're technically eating its storage stem, which is quite cool, actually. And when exposed to light, leucoplasts are able to change to chloroplasts. So to a large extent, it's not like a chloroplast maybe turns into a leucoplast, but it turns from a leucoplast into a chloroplast. Now, remember earlier I mentioned that something will only have chlorophyll if it is exposed to light. Now, where do potatoes grow? I don't know if you guys know this. It's not from trees. It's not from vines. It actually grows completely underground. Okay, so I want you to go and Google that as well. Have a look at how like these potatoes actually grow. It's very interesting. So if your parents have ever had extra potatoes, you'll notice that they always store it in a dark cupboard, and they don't store it just randomly out in the open. And that is because a lot of the time on the potato you'll get these little green bits that are growing, and those are called eyes. Now, please note that once those eyes start growing, you cannot eat that potato. They become poisonous, okay? They have these bits and pieces inside of them that just, don't really deal well with the human body. So, but what you can do is if one of those eyes form, you can cut out a little square where that eye is, and you can actually go plant that in the ground, and an entire new potato will develop from that. And I'm talking leaves, I'm talking roots, the whole shebang. So from this particular potato, because of the idea that leucoplasts can turn into chloroplasts, it can actually create a whole bunch of lovely bits and pieces for itself. Okay, we're going to push through now. I know this is 20 minutes, I'm sorry. So we're going to do the mitochondria. It is rod-shaped, and it's found in both plants and animals, and that is because both plants and animals need to produce energy in the stored energy form called ATP, where the outer membrane is smooth and the inner membrane has folds, and these folds are called cristae. Cristae, I don't care how you pronounce it, as long as you remember the folds are called cristae. So we'll draw that a little bit later. This is what it looks like. It's a more 3D version of the entire thing, so you guys get an idea. And you can see the sort of rod shape that it has. It's not perfectly round, it's rounded, but then it's been pulled out, and that creates a rod shape. So now we have, let's start at the top. It has the inner membrane, and when you draw it later on, I want you to write the folded inner membrane, and then you have a smooth outer membrane. But now what is extremely important is that you notice that there is a gap in between the inner membrane and the outer membrane. It wasn't important in chloroplasts, but it is important in mitochondria. And this is where a lot of the cellular respiration is actually able to occur as well. Now, as I said, the stroma is the cytoplasm of the chloroplast. The matrix at the bottom over there is the cytoplasm of the mitochondria. Then you'll see just above the word matrix over there is this weird sort of, structure that's coming off of that inner membrane. And that bit over there is actually called the cristae. And it's folded in like that because you can imagine if you had a piece of string and it was this long. Now, that is, let's say, X amount of centimeters. But if I start folding it, what have you noticed about the same length? It is now shorter. So I'm starting to save space, and I can cram more inner membrane inside, which means that I can do more reactions. So this is all for the idea of increasing surface area, and you need to make a note of that. So it is folded on the inside so that we can increase the surface area, and by increasing the surface area we can make more energy and we can make it quicker. This is just another version of exactly the same thing. It looks a bit more Spanish or like Mexican with the colors over there, but what you're noticing is that it also has an inner membrane, intermembrane space, the outer membrane, but now it also has mitochondrial DNA. Now I'm going to do a quick aside of this whole thing. Please note that a sperm cell is too small to carry a mitochondria inside of it. So it does have its own mitochondria, but when the sperm finds the egg, it doesn't release any of its mitochondria into the egg itself. So your DNA, or your mitochondrial DNA and your mitochondria itself, only comes from your mom. So go and hug her and say, thank you for my little mitochondria. And so you're only getting it from your mom, and that is a way that we can actually trace our lineage, because the mitochondrial DNA hardly ever changes, which means that's why you can go to the Origin Center at WITS and they take some of your mitochondrial DNA by just doing a little mouth swab, and they're able to track your lineage back like thousands of generations ago based purely on your mitochondrial DNA, because it hardly ever changes. Okay, and if it does change, it's very minor, and we can actually pick that up as we go along. So again, what you're now noticing is that scientists have also said that the outer membrane of the mitochondria is the same as the same as the cell membrane of the rest of the cell, but the inner membrane is not the same. And it's not the same as the inner membrane of the chloroplast either. So this is also saying to you that this is potentially another living structure that now lives in you and plants. So in each one of your cells, you have this little organism that's living inside of you, and it has its own DNA, which is really important. All right, then you can see the cristae over there and the green dots, which are ribosomes, and this is extremely important. So this entire mitochondria can produce its own protein, much like the chloroplast, without having to interfere with the nucleus at all. All right, so this is just a micrograph. You can see at the top over there what these really look like in real life. Okay, if you had to actually pull out one of your mitochondria and putting it under a transmission electron microscope, this is what you'd be able to see. And you're noting that the cristae are extremely long, and it almost creates this interlock web of cristae, which allows for this increase in surface area. And you can quite clearly see that there's an outer membrane and an inner membrane as well. All right, please draw this. Two things I want you to include over there is you can see the black dots. Remember to label them as ribosomes. And then I want you to also put a squiggly line over there and write out mitochondrial DNA. So the heading is at the top over there, diagram of a mitochondria. And once you finish drawing this, I want you to go and do this. Please turn this into a table and compare only the differences. So this is a Venn diagram. I don't know, you surely have done them in mathematics and a whole bunch of other subjects. But on the far left and on the far right, I have actually directly what do you call it? Compared the mitochondria to the chloroplast. So the mitochondria shape is rod, where the chloroplast it's oval. The membranes and the mitochondria consist cristae, which are folds on the inner membrane, whereas the chloroplast contains thylakoids and grana. Mitochondria does not contain photosynthetic pigments, whereas the chloroplast does contain photosynthetic pigments. And you can add in there named chlorophyll. And then on the left-hand side, we have found in plant and animal cells, whereas chloroplasts are only in plant cells. Mitochondria found in, I don't want you to write any of that stuff. I just want you to write there cellular respiration, whereas in chloroplast, just write down photosynthesis. Finally, the chloroplast of mitochondria has a matrix, which is the cytoplasm of the mitochondria, and the chloroplast cytoplasm is the stroma. All right, so I hope this lesson, there's a lot to do in this lesson, lots to draw, lots to come up with. If you've got any problems, let me know. In the next lesson, we're probably going to get into the slightly lesser known organelles, and it's maybe a bit more difficult to remember them, but it will be nice and easy. All right, ladies, look after yourself.